in a good direction. Today we're doing a deep dive into why that happens. We're talking about cognitive distortions.
Right. Those sneaky, unhelpful patterns of thinking that can really sort of hold us back.
Think of them like filters.
Yeah, filters that aren't quite accurate. They skew how we see ourselves, other people, the world, everything, really.
And they feel real, even when they're not based on, actual facts.
Precisely. Our minds treat them as gospel truth sometimes.
So in this deep dive, our aim is pretty straightforward. Understand these patterns and maybe get some practical ways to handle them.
Yep, equip you with some tools.
We've looked at quite a few sources: Healthline, Therapy in a Nutshell, the Day One Journal, Very Well Mind.
Therapy trainings, a cognitive connection, some research from PMC, even the American Medical Association.
So a good mix. And the mission is really just to give you some actionable ideas, ways to tackle that negative self-talk without needing a psychology degree.
Definitely. Because the important thing is, these patterns, they often become habits.
Habits, like brushing your teeth, but less helpful.
Kind of, yeah. They get ingrained over time. But the good news is, like any habit, you can actually work on changing them.
With awareness and the right strategies?
Exactly. You can build new, healthier ways of thinking.
Okay, so let's lay the groundwork. What are cognitive distortions exactly?
Well, at their core, they're basically inaccurate or irrational ways of thinking. Ways that make us misinterpret things that happen.
So it's our brain's interpretation that's off, not necessarily the event itself.
Right. Day One Journal and A Cognitive Connection both really highlight that gap. The gap between our thoughts and, objective reality.
But it's not like we're trying to become emotionless robots, right?
Yeah.
It's normal to have weird thoughts sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Totally normal. Day One Journal points that out. Everyone has irrational thoughts now and then.
Like spilling coffee and thinking, I'm such an idiot for a second.
Exactly that kind of thing. It's when those thoughts become really persistent, really pervasive, that's when they start causing trouble.
Okay, so when does it cross the line from just a fleeting thought to something, problematic?
It's when they get entrenched. When they become your default setting for interpreting things.
Your go-to way of seeing the world.
Yeah. And Healthline really emphasizes how that can negatively impact, pretty much everything. Your well-being, your relationships, what you think you can achieve.
So it's more serious than just feeling a bit down sometimes.
Definitely. Consistently thinking this way is linked to bigger issues. Things like depression, anxiety, relationship problems.
Self-sabotage, maybe?
Yeah, those self-defeating behaviors that stop you from, getting where you want to go. Healthline mentions that too.
You mentioned they can become habits. Day One Journal said that too, right? That's such a key point. Our brains love efficiency. So if we keep going down the same negative thought path,
it gets easier and easier to go down it again.
Exactly. Like wearing a groove in your mind becomes automatic.
And that's where things like therapy come in.
Precisely. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is often focused on exactly this.
Breaking those patterns.
Yeah, CBT looks at the link between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And several of our sources, Day One Journal, A Cognitive Connection, the AMA, they all note that targeting these cognitive distortions is a core part of CBT.
Okay, that makes sense. So we know what they are, why they matter. Let's get into specifics. What are some common examples, the kind of things people might recognize in themselves?
Oh, there are quite a few.
Yeah.
And just knowing them can be the first step. A really common one is black and white thinking.
All or nothing thinking.
Exactly. Healthline, therapy trainings, Very Well Mind. They all describe it. Seeing things in extremes. It's either perfect or it's a total disaster. No middle ground.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm not the best, I'm the worst. That kind of thing.
That's it, precisely. Very well. Mind uses the example. I can never do anything right. That absolute no exception statement.
Okay. Ouch. What's another one?
Another big one is catastrophizing.
Sounds dramatic.
It kind of is. It's jumping to the absolute worst case scenario. Playing the what if game to an extreme, even if the worst outcome is really unlikely.
Healthline, Day One Journal, AMA, they all mention this one.
Yep. It's very common.
Yeah.
You expect disaster.
Can you give an example, like how that might play out?
Sure. Day One Journal had a good one. Imagine you're, say, 5 minutes late for school or work.
Okay.
And your thought immediately jumps to, oh no, I'm late. My teacher boss will be furious. I'll probably get fired. Then I'll never get another job. I'll end up homeless.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
That escalated quickly.
That's catastrophizing, that chain reaction of increasingly terrible and improbable outcomes.
Yeah, just hearing it is stressful. Okay, what else?
Then there's overgeneralization.
Overgeneralization. Sounds like taking one thing and blowing it up.
Pretty much. You take one single negative event, maybe a bad date or a mistake at work, and you turn it into this sweeping conclusion like, I always mess things up or I'll never find a partner.
Based on just one instance.
Exactly. Healthline and therapy trainings point out how damaging that is. One setback becomes the rule for everything.
Got it. What's next on the list?
Personalization. This is where you assume everything others do or say is somehow a direct reaction to you.
Oh, like taking things personally when they're not meant that way.
Right. Or taking responsibility for things you actually can't control. Healthline and Day One Journal talk about this one.
So if your friend is quiet, you immediately think, what did I do wrong?
Exactly. Even if they're just tired or stressed about something totally unrelated.
Okay. And another one.
Discounting the positive, sometimes called filtering. A cognitive connection mentioned that term.
Filtering out the good stuff.
Yeah. You ignore or minimize positive things and focus almost entirely on the negative.
Day One Journal had an example like that, didn't they? Getting lots of praise, but only remembering the one tiny criticism.
That's a perfect example. 10 compliments, one suggestion for improvement, and all you hear is the suggestion. The positives just don't register.
Okay. What else?
Mind reading, which is a type of jumping to conclusions.
Assuming you know what someone else is thinking.
Precisely. Without any actual evidence. Day One Journal mentions this too. You just assume you know their intentions or thoughts, usually negatively.
Like, that person looked at me funny, they must hate my outfit.
Yeah, or the example Day One used. Someone doesn't text back immediately and you think they're definitely mad at me or our friendship is over.
Instead of thinking maybe they're just busy or didn't see the text.
Right, all sorts of other possibilities exist.
Man, we're building quite the collection here. What are a couple more really key ones?
Okay, two more important ones. Emotional reasoning and magnification.
Emotional reasoning. Does that mean thinking with your feelings?
Essentially, yes. It's believing something must be true because you feel it so strongly. Therapy in a Nutshell and Day One Journal both explain this. Your feeling becomes the evidence.
So I feel stupid, therefore I am stupid.
Exactly. Even if all objective evidence points the other way. Day One used, I feel I did poorly in the interview, so I must be bad at interviews. Therapy in a Nutshell had an example of feeling angry about a coworker's promotion and taking that feeling as proof it was unfair.
So your emotion dictates your reality. Wow. Okay. And magnification.
Magnification is basically exaggerating the negative and minimizing the positive. Kind of related to filtering, but more about scale.
Making mountains out of molehills.
That's a great way to put it. Day One Journal describes it well. Something bad happens and it feels enormous, catastrophic. Good things seem tiny and insignificant by comparison.
They had that example about summer camp, right? One kid gets sick and suddenly summer camp is dangerous.
Exactly. Despite maybe years of positive experiences, one negative gets blown way out of proportion.
Okay, wow, that's a lot of ways our thinking can get tangled up. So the big question, what can we actually do about it? How do we start untangling this stuff?
Right, the practical part. Thankfully, there are quite a few strategies, and a really fundamental one, which Healthline talks about, is self-monitoring.
Just noticing, paying attention.
Yeah, basically becoming aware you can't change what you don't see. So it starts with paying attention to the thoughts that pop up when you feel bad, sad, anxious, angry.
How do you actually do that, practically speaking?
Well, keeping a journal is a fantastic tool, both Healthline and a Cocker. A cognitive connection recommended.
Writing things down.
Write down the situation, the thoughts you had, the feelings that came up. Doing this regularly helps you spot those recurring patterns.
The distortions we were just talking about.
Exactly. You start to see, oh, whenever X happens, I tend to jump to Y conclusion. Even if you're not sure why at first, just seeing it written down is powerful.
Making the invisible visible. Okay, so once you start noticing the patterns, what's next?
The next big step is questioning your assumptions.
Challenging those thoughts.
Yep. Healthline and therapy trainings really emphasize this. Look at the actual evidence. Does this thought hold up to scrutiny? Is it really based on facts, or is it just that old distorted habit kicking in?
Like being a detective for your own thoughts.
Kind of. Healthline suggests literally listing the facts for and against a thought. If you think, I messed everything up, list actual evidence that supports that, and then evidence that contradicts it.
So you look for proof, not just feeling.
Precisely. You might ask, were there other factors involved? What's another way to look at this? It forces you to step back a bit.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, what else works?
Another technique Healthline mentions is generating alternatives.
Coming up with different thoughts.
Exactly. Once you've identified a distorted thought and poked holes in it, You actively try to come up with a more balanced, more realistic way of thinking about the situation.
Like replacing the negative thought.
Yeah, or at least offering a counter narrative. This could even involve positive affirmations, consciously replacing "I always fail" with something like "This was tough, but I learned something," or "I'm capable of figuring this out."
Rewriting the script in your head. Therapy in a nutshell also had some very practical stuff for when emotions get really intense, right?
Yes, they talked about slowing down, creating a pause.
Pause between the trigger and your reaction.
Exactly. When you feel that strong emotion welling up, anger, anxiety, whatever, just stop. Take a few deep breaths, maybe count to 10.
Buys you some time.
It buys you mental space. So you don't just react automatically based on that distorted, emotionally charged thought. They also mentioned HALT.
HALT.
Yeah, it's an acronym. Don't make big decisions when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
Because those states make us more vulnerable to negative thinking.
Absolutely. It's a simple but really effective reminder.
That's a good one to remember. They also mentioned opposite action. What's that about?
Opposite action is, well, it's doing the opposite of what your emotion, fueled by distorted thinking, is urging you to do.
So if you feel like hiding, you don't hide.
Pretty much. If you're anxious about a party and your gut says stay home, opposite action is making yourself go, even for a little while. Or their example, feeling hopeless and wanting to stay in bed, but you get up and start your day anyway.
That sounds hard.
It takes conscious effort, definitely.
Yeah.
But it directly challenges the distortion by showing your feelings don't have to dictate your actions, which can then, over time, change the feelings too.
Interesting. What about predicting triggers and analyzing reactions? Also from therapy, in a nutshell.
Yeah, those are more about long-term pattern recognition. Predicting triggers means figuring out what situations or people tend to set off your negative thought spirals.
So you can prepare for them.
Exactly. You can anticipate and maybe have a plan for how to cope differently. Analyzing reactions is looking back, okay, I really blew up last Tuesday. What was going on in my head just before that? How could I handle it differently next time?
Learning from experience. The Day One Journal focused a lot on cognitive journaling. How is that different from just regular journaling?
It's more structured. They outlined a specific process. First, describe the event objectively, just the facts, no judgment.
Okay.
Second, connect those facts to the thoughts and emotions you had during the event. And third, the key part, actively challenge your assumptions. Identify the distortions. Was I mind reading there? Was that black and white thinking?
So it's really analytical, like dissecting the thought process.
Yeah. And they suggested using journal prompts to help with that.
Like specific questions to ask yourself.
Yeah. Things like, what's the absolute worst I'm imagining? What's actually most likely? Or what are 3 other ways to view this situation? Prompts can really guide that deeper reflection and help you reframe things.
And then there was Socratic questioning from therapy trainings. How does that work?
Socratic questioning uses open-ended questions to gently guide you or someone else to examine your own thoughts more closely.
Not telling you you're wrong, but helping you see it for yourself.
Exactly. It prompts self-discovery. Asking things like, what's the evidence for that thought? What's the evidence against it? Or how might someone else see this differently? What's the effect of thinking this way?
Helping you get unstuck from a rigid perspective. The AMA source mentioned reality testing specifically for catastrophic thinking.
Yes, that's crucial for catastrophizing. Reality testing is about actively checking. How likely is this terrible outcome I'm dreading?
Comparing the fear to the actual odds.
Right, because people who catastrophize often overestimate the probability of disaster. Dr. Zobser at the AMA pointed out this difficulty in accurately assessing risk. So consciously looking at the evidence, the statistics, the likely consequences versus the feared ones, that can really challenge the catastrophe narrative.
And finally, there was that interesting study from PMC about mindfulness and critical thinking. What was the takeaway there?
Well, it was a bit counterintuitive. They found that among adolescents, having high critical thinking skills was actually linked to more psychological distress, but only when their mindfulness levels were low.
Wait, so being a good critical thinker could make things worse if you're not also mindful. How does that work?
The researchers suggested that critical thinking helps you spot flaws, right? Logical errors. But if you turn that critical lens too harshly on your own thoughts and feelings, without the balance of mindfulness.
Mindfulness being that non-judgmental awareness.
Exactly. Without that non-judgmental observation, the critical thinking might just become intense self-criticism, focusing only on flaws, potential negatives, worries, leading to more distress.
So, knowing about logical fallacies isn't the same as being able to gently notice them in your own head without beating yourself up.
That seems to be the idea. Critical thinking identifies the what, the distortion. Mindfulness helps with the how, observing it with some distance and compassion, rather than getting swept away by it or judging yourself for having the thought.
That's a really interesting distinction. It adds another layer. Now, the AMA also dove deeper specifically into catastrophic thinking. What else do they say about it?
Well, they defined it clearly. Believing really unlikely bad things are almost certainly going to happen.
Leading to that feeling that everything's going to unravel.
Exactly. That life will just be ruined. Dr. Zabler noted it's common, sometimes linked to anxiety disorders, and can even be a risk factor for PTSD after trauma.
And he mentioned the problem with reality testing again.
Yes, that difficulty in accurately judging risk is core to it.
Did they link it to other specific issues?
They did. Health anxiety, for one.
Like hypochondria, thinking a headache is a brain tumor?
That kind of thing, yes. Interpreting minor physical symptoms as signs of catastrophe. And also pain management, catastrophizing about pain can actually make the pain feel worse.
Because of the mind-body connection.
Precisely. Our thoughts and emotions have a real impact on physical sensation. They also briefly touched on how major stressful events, like, say, the COVID-19 pandemic, could understandably trigger or worsen catastrophic thinking for some people because of all the uncertainty.
Yeah, that makes sense. It really shows how pervasive this thinking style can be. The AMA also talked about self-care as being important, right? As a buffer.
Absolutely. Dr. Zabler really stressed the basics. Getting enough sleep, regular exercise, using mindfulness or relaxation techniques. These aren't luxuries. They're foundational for managing negative thoughts and building resilience.
And doing things you enjoy, connecting with people.
Yes. Pleasurable activities, social connection. They have real psychological benefits that help counteract negativity and support overall well-being.
So looking after yourself isn't selfish. It's actually essential for maintaining mental balance. What about if you see someone else spiraling into these catastrophic thoughts? How can you help without making it worse?
That's a great question. The AMA suggested approaching it with empathy, not judgment.
So you don't just say, stop worrying, that's ridiculous.
Definitely not. Instead, try gently conveying concern. Maybe ask, you seem really anxious. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Offering to listen without dismissing their fears can be incredibly helpful.
Just being there, letting them talk.
Yeah. Feeling heard and understood can make a big difference. And if it seems like the anxiety is really persistent or severe, gently suggesting they might want to talk to a professional could be a supportive next step.
That's really helpful advice. Focus on support, not fixing or judging. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main thing you hope people take away from all this?
I think the biggest thing is realizing that you can change these patterns. You have the ability to become aware of them and to challenge them.
They're not set in stone.
Not at all. They might feel automatic, but with conscious effort, using some of these techniques, you really can shift towards more balanced, more realistic thinking.
And it's good to know that while therapy is a fantastic resource, there are things we can start doing ourselves, like the journaling, questioning assumptions, mindfulness.
Exactly. These are skills you can learn and practice. It's about becoming, a more skilled observer of your own mind, a more compassionate one too.
Right. So maybe a little challenge for everyone listening this week. Pick one negative thought pattern you recognize in yourself, just one, and try applying one technique. Maybe just track when it shows up, or try to argue against it, find the counter evidence, or just brainstorm one or two alternative ways to think about that situation.
See what happens when you actively engage with it instead of just letting it run the show.
Exactly. See what happens, maybe explore some of the resources we mentioned, or start that thought journal. It could be the beginning of your own personal deep dive into reshaping how you think.